So I did some research, especially because there's flooding going on in Florida. There's always flooding going on along the Mississippi River this time of year. My family is from Arkansas. I have family in Tennessee. So flooding was a part of our lifestyle. It was, my family grew up in generations where you still put your house up on stakes. So when the flood water came, you just brought the animals into the house and the flood just went underneath and kept on going. They don't really do that anymore. They just say, hey, just don't build your house on a floodplain. However, as we know, economically, sometimes it is not really an option. And historically in the past, some of those individuals who have been most impacted by flood are those that economically do not have the ability to restore from it or to build somewhere else. That is going to increase in the coming years. Some of the research, there was an article that I read, and I'm going to get the name of the article in a few minutes. I'll come back to it. That said that because of global warming, and we're not talking about that, that's a political issue. It is or is not. However, waters are rising, and there will be, I'm sorry. Okay, there'll be an increase in flooding, 14.4% in Baltimore City, 20%, 20.9% in Baltimore County, 5.8% in Carroll County, which is where I live. And so areas that historically were not considered being in a floodplain may or may not experience unexpected flooding in the next 5 to 10 years. What do you think about that, Jeff?
Well, Ramona, you shared a lot of great information there. I'm not going to talk so much about whether the climate change is reality or not, but I do want to talk about the fact of the risk that people face in the here and now today, because we want people to take action today based on what they're hearing. The reality is that Mother Nature doesn't pay a whole lot of attention to our opinions.
Nope.
We can draw lines on the map and say we think it's going to flood here, but as we've seen from events like happened in Fort Lauderdale, where they received 21 to 24 inches of rain in 24 hours, the flooding in Utah, and if you're like those of us who live out here in Southern California, there's 300% more snowpack in the mountains that's going to be melting this summer.
Right.
So, Mother Nature has a way of doing extreme things. And if you're just talking about a normal rain shower, yeah, you probably have a good sense whether or not your home is going to flood. But whenever the unusual events happen, and they're happening more commonly these days, anywhere it can rain, it can flood. And if you look at some examples, in Hurricane Harvey, 80% of the homes and businesses flooded were not in the high-risk zone. People talk about, I'm not in a flood zone. Everybody's in a flood zone. It's just not everybody's in the flood plain. The high-risk areas where the banks make you carry insurance. But once you're out of that flood zone, the number of people who own flood insurance drops dramatically because they think they don't need it. But just because somebody's not forcing you to buy it doesn't mean you don't need it. And I guarantee in Fort Lauderdale and in other places when there's major events, many people just don't have the flood insurance to help them recover.
So to begin with, let's first talk about what is flood. What is a flood? How is that defined? Because we kind of made a little bit of distinction last week when we were talking about backup sewer and drainage, because one of the mistakes that people make when they call in to file a backup sewer and drainage claim is they say, my basement is flooding. But what is the definition of a flood?
Well, I can give you the technical definition from FEMA, but in general terms, it's rising water. It's not the water from a leak in the house. It's not the water from a hole in the roof, not the window for when a tree limb flies through your window. So the actual definition from FEMA is a general or temporary condition of partial or complete inundation of 2 or more acres of normally dry land or 2 or more properties from overflow of inland or tidal waters, unusual rapid accumulation of runoff from surface waters from any source, and mud flow. Now, if you're around an area where there's been some landscape has been burned by fire, mud flow is a serious issue.
I think in addition to that, we want to highlight that it doesn't have to be a second property that's next to you. It can also be a second property that's on your street or up the street from you or even across the street.
Yeah, and they talk about a general condition of flooding. And if there's flooding in the area, then the adjuster is not going to say, I'm sorry, your next door neighbor didn't flood, so you're not covered.
You sure? Yes, no, that he's not. Because if it's really flooding, it is going to be a natural disaster. Like we had about, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago, as Baltimore City works on their infrastructure here, we had roadways in areas that were for blocks and blocks, just completely underwater. And then 2 blocks over, nothing. And then 2 blocks over from that, the area is completely underwater. Houses and cars, you can't drive through. And I think, as you were indicating, that is the difference between a water issue in your basement and a flood, because you are inundated. It's rising water, stuff is underwater. It's not a situation where a pipe burst and the water is going to wash off.
Yeah. What's interesting is it says it's an unusual rapid accumulation of surface runoff from any source. Believe it or not, if somebody hits a fire hydrant in front of your house and it floods all the homes down that street, that's flood insurance.
Wow.
If a tsunami hits the coast, that's covered under flood insurance.
Okay. All right. So we got the definition of what flood is. How does a flood policy work?
Well, a flood policy is the best thing to help you recover when you have a loss. It can provide coverage for your building. It can provide coverage for your personal belongings. And obviously it can help you do some initial preparation prior to the flood. You can receive payment for up to $1,000 for what's called loss avoidance. That means putting sandbags in your house and the cost of labor to put sandbags around your property. You can also get paid up to $1,000 for the cost to move your property to safety. If you know your home is going to flood and you've got a storage place, a couple miles away where you can move some of your belongings and you've got enough notice. So it can cover a lot of things, but one of the things it doesn't cover is additional living expenses. That's different from your home insurance policy.
Right. And additional living expenses is the cost of a hotel or a long-term stay in a long-term facility, like a long-term apartment, where you may have to temporarily go live because your house has to be repaired or replaced, for that matter, because of the damage of a flood. Your personal property is not covered for replacement costs, or it can be covered for replacement costs.
That's a great question. Under policies issued through the National Flood Insurance Program, your personal possessions, your couches, your TVs, your electronics, your rugs, your towels, your bedspreads, your socks and shoes, all those things, you're going to receive what is called actual cash value. In other words, that is their current value, not what it's going to cost you to head to Macy's and replace them.
That's right. And that's important to acknowledge, because a lot of people have gotten upset because it is not, the flood policy doesn't function like your homeowner's policy, where you can go out and replace these things. It's not really designed to function like your homeowner's policy. It's designed to function in an assistance toward restoring you from this natural disaster that has occurred, whether it's natural or man-made. Because if somebody hits a fire hydrant, then that's not natural. They were probably quite inebriated too, but
That does happen.
yes. But the flood policy is designed to sort of stabilize you, to say, okay, we know this occurred. And really, because of the way the structure of the policy is set up, it is designed to take really some of the pressure off of FEMA, because FEMA does not provide everything to you either. FEMA is set
Right.
up to really to stabilize the environment, not to restore it.
Yeah, Ramona, you make a good point there. One of the objections we commonly hear to people talking about whether or not they need flood insurance is, hey, I don't have to worry about that. Government disaster assistance will take care of me. The problem with that approach is government disaster assistance is only a very small solution. Generally, you're talking about $4,000 or $5,000 for some short-term housing assistance. But most of the assistance people receive from the government is sorry, I've got a dog bark in the background.
That's okay.
But it's a loan from the Small Business Administration. And so, assuming you can qualify for that loan, now after the loss, you've got your house payments, and then you've got another $30,000 to $200,000 loan that you have to pay on top of that. It's not a great way to approach it. The other thing to keep in mind is that it has to be a federally declared disaster to qualify for disaster assistance. And most of the rain events and flood events that we experienced don't qualify as a federal disaster.
Right, because I believe part of it has to occur over more than one state, not in just like a couple of blocks in your state.
I cannot speak to that, Ramona, but as to the requirements. But the important thing is to know is that disaster assistance isn't always available, and when it is available, it just doesn't get the job done. It's a Band-Aid on the real problem.
Absolutely. And with your flood insurance, I had a question that was texted me. What is the maximum amount that you can insure your house for under flood insurance?
Let me give you two answers to that question. In the past 5 to 10 years, in addition, first of all, flood insurance is a program that was created by the federal government. They established the rules and the rates. And for the federal government program, or the National Flood Insurance Program, the limits that are on how much coverage you could buy for a residential, for your home, it's up to $250,000 for the building and $100,000 for its contents or your personal possessions. However, in the past 5 to 10 years, a number of private insurance companies have began offering flood insurance. And for many of those policies, they offer much higher limits of coverage. And some of them even offer replacement cost on contents. And so people should look at both options when they consider buying flood insurance. There are pros and cons to each type of policy, but there are some more choices out there that should be considered.
Absolutely. I think also too, when looking at flood insurance, and for those who don't own a business and are not used to the commercial insurance environment, and when you buy a commercial insurance policy versus a personal lines, commercial insurance requires you to pay it in full. Flood insurance acts the same way, and that's the other thing. There's no monthly payment, or unless it is included in your escrow account for your house. There is no financing options. When you get a flood policy, the amount has to be paid in full for the year.
Yeah, the only financing option is put it on a credit card, and some of those have some pretty high interest.
Yes. So that's also something else that you want to keep in mind. However, the time to buy a flood policy is when you don't need it, or when you think you don't need it, because the rating factors for areas that are not considered in a floodplain are not as expensive as those that are. And there are several different rating factors, including where you live, whether or not your community participates in what is it called?
The National Flood Insurance Program.
Yeah, the National Flood Insurance Program. And if and you can easily find out by going down to your local municipality and asking, does this community participate in the National Flood Insurance Program? If it does not, I recommend highly that you begin a process in requesting that happens, because it's going to allow your rates to be more economical, and it's going to give you access and privy to a lot more information with regards to what is necessary for flood. Is that not right, Jeff?
Yeah, and Ramona, while most communities do participate in the NFIP, some of your smaller rural communities just don't have the personnel to administer a program, and that's where you tend to see it. But what I encourage people to approach the situation about flood insurance is to ask yourself the question, what am I going to do after a foot of water comes into my house? And there's a great little tool on the government website. It's at floodsmart.gov, G-O-V, floodsmart.gov. They have a cost of flooding tool. You can just simply slide the measuring stick up and down the screen to the water depth you want, and it'll show you the cost. And just a few inches of water can cost thousands of dollars for damage. You're talking about carpets, rugs, electronics. Your couch is 6 inches off the floor. When you get 7 inches of water, your couch is ruined. Your clothes and stuff in the bottom dresser drawer. There's so much that gets damaged, even at small amounts of water. So if you're sitting there dealing with a $25,000 to $50,000 bill through, which check do you want to write? Do you want to write a check for flood insurance, or do you want to write a check for $25,000?
Absolutely, absolutely. Without a doubt, I'm 100% in belief of insurance. I was asked yesterday by a gentleman, can I not just self-insure? Sure, you can. Do you have $1 million that you can escrow into an account so that it's sitting there in case you need it? I think, and I know that insurance is an intangible item. It's not something that you see, you can touch, that is there. It's hypothetically or theoretically or idealistically, it's there. And you don't understand or see the impact of it not being available until something happens. And it's all about determining whether or not something is going to happen. What is the probability of this occurring? What is the risk factor? The fact of the matter is, if something has occurred once, the probability of it occurring again is 50% greater than if it had never occurred. And we know that floods happen in the most unexpected places when you think, oh, I'm safe. You're not. The safest thing to do is to get a policy. Yes, sir.
No, Ramona, I was going to recommend that people start the process by just getting a free quote.
Mm-hmm.
At Farmers, we like to say we help people get smarter about their insurance, and you as the flood insurance guru, that's something you strive to do every week and every day in your office. So one of the ways to help you get smarter is understand, if you did buy flood insurance, what would the cost be? Because if you're in a low to moderate risk area, the cost can be very affordable. It can be down as low as $300 to $500 a year.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a higher risk area, the premiums get up to $1,500 a year, and some properties can get even higher. But when you see that number go up, that tells you your risk is going up as well. So You need to keep both in mind.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes we forget that if because I hear it costs so much or insurance costs so much. Well, the cost of insurance is commensurate to the type of risk that you are exposed to. And I get it. You may not have had a claim, but other people like you are having claims. And thereby, the insurance company can only do their best guess by saying, okay, we got these people over here with these characteristics, and 8 out of 10 of them are having claims. So thereby, this is the cost to make sure that if in the future 8 out of 10 has a claim, we have enough money to pay for everybody that needs to be covered. And at the end of the day, that really is the bottom line. Will we have enough money to cover you when something happens? And you want us to have enough money.
Yeah, you don't want a bankrupt insurance company when you're filing a claim.
No, you want us to not only be around this year, but next year, and to be able to do what Farmers does. And they do it so well. They come out and they say, okay, we see what's happening, and they start cutting checks. Their goal is to take care of you, to make you want to stay with us. I mean, really that simple. And you want us to be able to do that. I get it. In this market that we're in right now, the insurance rates are all over the place, but the risk has not changed. We just have to prioritize what's important and make sure that we understand why insurance has to be there. Because the worst thing that I have seen is when insurance is not there. Yeah. When somebody made a decision that this year they're going to let this policy cancel. And that's the very time when something happens. Yeah. And I have to tell them, your policy canceled back in February. Remember we spoke. And I think when we are looking at the cost of coverage versus the risk, we have to prioritize and make sure that the things that are important to us are financially protected. And the way to do that is to get the insurance that's needed. So we're going to take a station identification break. When we come back, we're going to talk some more, dig into flood. We're going to talk about the different rating factors, and I want to talk about how the policy works. Is that good, Jeff?
That works for me, Ramona.
Absolutely. So we're going to take a station break for identification, and we will be back. This is Ramona Jones McClain, your insurance guru.
WOLB Baltimore and WERQ FM HD3 Baltimore, celebrating Radio 1's 42nd anniversary.
Our Radio 1 family, our employees, their family members, our listeners, our viewers, our extended family.
And serving the African American community for over 42 years.
The views and opinions of the guest and host you hear are not necessarily those of the staff and management of Radio 1, its sponsors, or advertisers.
As the road you travel changes, so can your insurance needs. Talking with Farmers Insurance Agent Ramona Jones McClain can help you assess whether you're ready for the journey ahead. Call Farmers Agent Ramona Jones McClain today at 443-660-7131. That's Ramona Jones McClain at 443-660-7131.
We are farmers. Bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 bum.
Underwritten by Farmers, Truck Fire Insurance Exchanges and Affiliates. Products not available in every state.
Hello, DMV. This is Ramona Jones McClain, your insurance guru. I am a Farmers agent located at 11707 Ricestown Road in Ricestown, Maryland. Here, you can call me at 443-660-7131 or listen to my show every Thursday at 3:30 p.m. on WOLB.
right, you're back live in 3, 2, 1, whenever you're ready.
All right, DMV. This is Ramona Jones McClain, your insurance guru, and today we are live talking about flood insurance because it is April showers, and we know that April is known for its massive rainfall. Today we have with us Mr. Jeff Hinesley, who is with the flood program with Farmers Insurance, and is here today as our resident expert talking about flood insurance. So before we were talking about the necessity, the importance, the time to get flood insurance, the components of getting a flood policy. Let's talk about how we rate the flood policy.
Well, the great thing about flood insurance policy is your driver record or your credit score or your income doesn't impact your rate. It's based upon your property itself. They're really looking at how your property is constructed. Is it a concrete slab on the ground? Is it have a crawl space? Is it a frame house, or is it masonry? Those things go into the rating, but they're also looking at the location of your property. How high off the ground is the first living area? Now, if you're right on the beach and your home is at ground level, that's a much higher risk than somebody who's on stilts 8 feet in the air. Mm-hmm. They also look at how close you are to sources of flooding, such as, where is the nearest body of water, or where is the nearest possible source of flooding? Because what a lot of people don't realize is that drainage systems can be overwhelmed. And drainage systems where you don't normally see water, the culvert behind your house or the drainage ditch. When Mother Nature sends down large quantities of water, those can be overwhelmed and flood into the surrounding area. So items like that can be a source of flooding. But so those are some of the factors that go into rate. Now, obviously, the value of your home.
Mm-hmm. And usually, when we set up the amount of coverage for the dwelling, what percentage is that to the value of the home?
Could you restate that question, Ramona?
I said, usually when we do the quoting for the flood, we usually don't quote it at 100% of the replacement cost. A lot of homes in this area are at 400,000 or 500,000, 300,000. Some in Baltimore City around 250,000. We talked about earlier the maximum amount of coverage under the flood policy, unless you go to a private carrier, is around 250,000. Correct?
Yeah. Well, FEMA recently changed the way they rate home insurance, flood insurance, and under the current system, the replacement cost of your home is a factor in the cost of the insurance. So it's important to make sure you get a proper value in there for the home replacement cost. Now, obviously, if you have a home that's worth more than $250,000, you can't get more than $250,000 worth of coverage on your building, or $100,000 on your contents. But putting down the full replacement cost of your home is important to get an accurate rate.
And the amount, let's just say it's 300,000. Because I remember being in a class a while ago, and it talked about how it may not be necessary to try to insure your house for flood up to the value of the total replacement cost of the house because of where the damage occurs. Like, very rarely do you have a situation, except in Louisiana, where water reaches the second floor.
We see that all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
But the damage a flood can do, one of our district managers in Houston, the water pushed her house off their slab. So I would never encourage anyone to not cover the full value of the home. We had a large condominium on the beach everybody thought, well, I live on the 10th floor. I'm never gonna have to worry about it.
Right.
Well, the water eroded the foundation of that building and the whole building had to be torn down.
Okay.
So I would want to make sure that in the event of an unexpected loss, the full value of my home would be covered.
Okay. I just want to make sure that that's out there because it's been a topic in the past. Okay, so we understand what the rating factors are. What about it used to be when you were quoting flood, you had to go get your elevation report. How do we determine that? Where can somebody go and get that from?
Right. Well, let me give some good news, and that is that under FEMA's new way of rating flood insurance, you're no longer required to provide an elevation certificate. Now, if you've got one, we encourage customers to provide that because what the rating system will do is it'll look, FEMA has a way of calculating the first floor height, which it uses as a basis for rate. If the elevation certificate gives you a better result, they will use your certificate. If it gives you a worse result, they ignore the certificate. So it can only help you. It can't hurt you. Now, you talked about where do you find one? Well, there are a couple places. One is if you're buying a home, the current owner, if you would ask for that and make sure you capture that. If you've been in your home for a number of years and you have no idea where the past owner is, then I would encourage you to check with your local floodplain management department as far as your city or county. Generally, you can find out who's responsible for floodplain management. And generally, a builder will provide those to the city whenever they're building a new area, if they're required to provide those. And if you are in a recently built area or a newer home, I would reach out to the builder of that subdivision. They could also possibly provide you one as well. So those are some great sources for those if you don't know where one is. But if you can't find one, you don't have to worry about it. You can still, FEMA will still give you a flood insurance policy.
And it's easy to get a flood code. It's just a phone call. You call in and it takes maybe 15 minutes to process it and to give you a quote. So let's talk about some of the things that flood does not cover. I have a caller who calls in frequently, Brother Carlos, and he says, well, the first thing you should look at when you're looking at an insurance policy is what are the exclusions. So let's do Brother Carlos a favor and talk about what's not covered under flood.
Well, a couple of them we've already mentioned. And one is replacement cost for your contents, where they're paid to actual cash values. So if it's going to cost you $3,000 to replace that sofa and it's only worth $1,000, that's a gap.
Mm-hmm.
The other item, as we talked about, is that there's no additional living expense coverage, or if you're a business, what's called business interruption coverage to cover those lost profits while your business is shut down being repaired. But beyond that, there are some limitations to flood insurance as well. If you have a basement in your home, then certain items in the basement are not covered. I'll give you some examples. But one of the things you have to watch out for is a lot of times people have basements and don't realize it. By FEMA's definition, a basement is any room where the floor is below the ground level on all sides. So a sunken living room, if it's below the ground level, can be considered a basement.
Wow.
But in a basement, if you've converted it into your man cave where you've got a 55-inch flat screen TV, you've got leather sofas, and you've got a beer cooler down there, none of that stuff is going to be covered. In the basement, they cover things like heaters and furnaces, water heaters, the electrical, and unfinished walls. But if you've got carpeting and personal possessions down there, none of that's going to be covered. So if you are in an area where there's a risk of flooding and you have a basement, I would take time to move those things upstairs before that rain starts coming down.
Which
If
is
you can.
in this area, we are known for basements. There is not a house in this area that, well, there are some that are strictly ranches, but I would say 70% of the houses in Maryland, DC, Virginia have basements.
Yeah.
It's big time.
Yeah. And some people say, well, listen, you know, flood insurance doesn't cover my basement, why buy it? Well, if we were to provide coverage for basements, it would be very expensive
Mhm.
because basements are holes in the ground that fill up with water. You know, you get an inch of water outside, it becomes 8 feet in a basement. So its basement coverage is very expensive to get. But there's still a lot of damage that it can cover. There are items down there that are covered. And if it gets up beyond the basement, then there's a lot of damage that your flood insurance will pay for up there.
But also too, I think the most important things is that it covers the essential items that help the house to operate, like the furnace, the hot water heater. And I think it will also cover your appliances, your washer and dryer that may be in the basement.
I would need to double check that,
Okay,
but
we're gonna
Let-
double check that.
we'll double check that one. But
Okay, but you know, your hot water heater, your furnace system can be thousands of dollars that would be covered under a flood policy. I mean, I know you love your bear rug and your velvet sofa. I get that, but you know, you can go to Rent-A-Center and buy one for what, $50 a month and replace those things. Where your furnace, you know, that's $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 depending on the size of your house. And it's worth it. It's worth paying $400 a year to have those items protected.
Yeah.
You know.
And Ramona, you talked about things that aren't covered. One of the things that causes some people some concern is that the flood insurance policy doesn't cover earth movement.
Mm.
Now, if the stream beside your house overflows and the water rushes under your house and undercuts the foundation, your house tilts, that kind of damage is covered. But if the ground just settles because of flooding that's happened in the area, and you start seeing cracks in your wall, the flood insurance policy doesn't cover that. That's just ground always settles over time. In some areas, it's a bigger problem than others.
Right. Right. We talked about that a little bit last week with backup sewer and drainage, where flood coming in through cracks in the foundation are not, I mean, water coming in, I said flood, water coming in through the cracks in foundation is not considered a backup sewer and drainage problem. In some respects, it's actually considered a maintenance issue. It's not like you woke up one day and the crack was there and the water decided to come through that very day. I mean, not that that couldn't happen, but that's 1 in a billion. You can, if you are doing your due diligence and expecting the areas around your house, then you can seal those cracks. You can do the things that are necessary to eliminate further damage. Instead of letting it go into the whole side falls down and your house is tilting over on the side. That's some of the things as being a responsible homeowner that's necessary in order to eliminate situations from occurring. So here we are, another situation where cracks that settle over a period of time is not covered under flood and or on the backup sewer and drainage. This is something that as a homeowner, we have to take care of. We're going to talk about that a little bit next week. But I'm sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
No, I was going to mention, I think it's good that we talked about the exclusions, but it's what we need to remember is it covers what it does cover is a great deal more than what it doesn't cover.
Absolutely.
And anytime there's a flooding event, it's pretty easy to tell which homes they had bought flood insurance because they're the ones that are able to get a contract in there and start getting the home worked on.
Right.
For many others, the process of getting back in their home and getting it restored can take years, if at all.
Absolutely. I think we learned that well enough from Hurricane Katrina that caused so much damage. There are properties and homes down there that still are not restored. And it's been what, 12 years, 14 years, maybe at this point.
Yeah. And there was Superstorm Sandy that was up there in the Northeast. And in the Maryland area there, it was a number of years ago, but there was a major storm that hit in that area.
Absolutely. And the governor made the decision not to declare it a hurricane so that the hurricane deductible would not apply. But it was really a serious storm, and it did a lot of damage. I think that's the one I'm thinking about, where blocks were flooding in Baltimore City, here, there, and everywhere. And of course, we cannot forget about Ellicott City, who has flooded in the last 5 years 4 times. I believe it's 4 times. Correct me if I'm wrong, Taylor. And they have repeated issues with flooding in that particular area, to the point where a lot of businesses have not come back from it. So it can happen no matter where you are. Everyone is subject to a flood incident. And it's important that you take a look at your budget and your priorities and just call. You can call us at 443-660-7131. We've got about 12 minutes left. If you have questions, you can give us a call at 410-481-1010. So Jeff, before you go, give us a wrap up of what's in a flood policy, why is it important, and why do they need to call right now?
Great questions, Ramona. As relates to right now, obviously that we're in the spring flooding season. It's important to understand that flood insurance policies have a 30-day waiting period. So if you were to walk into Ramona's office today and say, I want this policy, and hand her a check, your coverage won't start for another 30 days. Now, if you're closing on a home at a lender, the coverage should start the same day. But for most people, it's a 30-day wait. So that's something to keep in mind.
And tell us why they do that. They do that because they know that you are going to see the storm coming and come rushing in, thinking, oh, I'm going to be taking, no, foresight, planning. Okay, go ahead, Jeff, sorry.
Yeah, there wasn't a waiting period when they first started the program, but people would see a hurricane out in the Gulf and then Mexico and coming their way, and they'd go buy flood insurance. Mm-hmm. We want people to buy when the sun's shining, so it's there when you don't see the clouds coming. So we talked about 30-day waiting period. The other thing is understand your risk a little bit. An interesting statistic from FEMA, and that's the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is they have found that 40% of the claims they receive are for homes that are outside of the high-risk flood zones. Mm-hmm. So these are people that are not required to buy insurance by their lender. And that's where 40% of their claims are coming from. Now, important thing to understand is those are claims. Those aren't the number of homes damaged by flooding. Those are the number of homes that were damaged by flooding and had insurance. And that number is 40%. Mm-hmm. So Mother Nature doesn't care where we draw those lines on the map. She's going to flood who she wants to flood. And if Mother Nature sets a record in your area, you want to be in good financial standing when the dust is settled. You want to have the coverage you need to recover.
Absolutely. The article that I was reading from earlier was called The Conversation. It is a web-based information gathering for flood, and it's called The Conversation, and it talks about flood risk from 2020 to 2050 and the increase of the likelihood of flooding in different areas. It also talks about the fact that some of the areas that will be most hardest hit are those that are urban and economically disadvantaged because they don't prioritize flood insurance or don't understand the need of it. whether you live in a condo or an apartment, and you still need flood insurance, just like you still need backup insurance and drainage insurance, mainly because it's not about the water always touching you. It's about the cause of the damage that is being caused. So if a flood comes, like Jeff said, and damages the foundation of a property and the property collapse, not your renter's insurance or your condo insurance may not necessarily cover it because the cause of the event was a flood.
And Ramona, you made a great point. There are a couple of great points. One is we've talked about homeowners. We haven't talked about renters. And a lot of folks out there renting, and they have no idea what the risk is for that property because their landlord's not going to say, hey, this place is flooded 5 times in the last 10 years. So I would encourage, if you're a renter, to talk to Ramona. She can do a flood zone determination on that property, give you some sense of the risk, and make sure that you get coverage, because flood insurance is available for renters as well.
Yes.
The cost of covering just your contents is a lot less than covering a house and contents.
Absolutely. Yes, you can get a content only policy that will allow you to make sure that you are protected if something happens. And flooding is a real risk that we need to really look at because it's happening more and more frequently in areas that were not previously designated as a risk. Last thing, Jeff, leave us with one last thing.
You know, what I would say is that I have been managing our company's flood program since 2005. And I scan the news articles every day for stories about flood. And I noticed 2 common themes. One is when FEMA comes in and remaps an area and people are being forced to buy flood insurance. The complaint is, I've lived here 30 years and I've never seen it flood. I don't need flood insurance. It's never going to flood here. I also see the stories that on the same day from another area where Mother Nature let down a lot of rain and people say, I never thought it would flood here. So ask yourself, where do I want to be when the rains do come? Do I want to be able to sleep at night knowing that I can rebuild? Do I want to be able to sleep at night knowing that I'm not going to have to live in a house with a sheetrock stripped to the walls for years?
Yes.
And I like sleeping at night and not having to worry about those things.
Well, Jeff, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. You are just a huge bucket of information. Thank you so much. We enjoyed this, and we appreciate you being here. And hopefully we'll have you back again in the fall when we talk about hurricane season. All right. Thank you so much. So listeners, if you have questions and you want to call in and get a flood quote, you can always give us a call at 443-660-7131. We are ready and waiting. We have 2 producers in our office that are able to flood for you. If you have questions, you still have time to call in today at 410-481-1010. Flood insurance is a product that everybody doesn't think about until the water comes. It is April showers. The rains are happening soon. Not as much as we've had in the past, but this is the time of the year when we need to think about what is important and having access to coverage that makes sure that everything is in place. Flood insurance does not have to be expensive, especially if you get it before somebody says you have to. You don't want to wait until your area is determined a higher flood risk. You want to call in and take a look at it. You also do not need to own the property that you are residing in order to get flood insurance. You can get if you are a renter or a leaser, you can get flood insurance on your contents. There are content only policies. The other thing is look at your budget, because flood policies have to be paid for in full. And it is necessary for you to do so as the products are not financed, or there is not a monthly payment plan set up for you to get flood insurance. There are, according to Jeff, some carriers out there that will provide increased coverages because they're private carriers. I do not know what they are. We're going to do some research on that, and I'll bring it up next week. So next week, we're still talking about April showers and rain and everything. Next week, we're going to talk about landscaping. We're going to talk about the things that you do, your neighbors, the folks across the street, that when you change the way water flows and moves around your property, what can you do to make sure water does not pool, does not sit up or sat beside your house, that it flows out and away and drains off. When you're looking at creating flower beds, when you're looking at creating things like patios and pergolas and balconies and all kind of structures, adding to your value of your house. We'll talk about that soon later on this year, the things that add value to the value to your property. What can you do? What type of landscaper do you need? What things that need to be in place in order for you to make sure that you are causing water to flow away and not pool up against your house? These things are important in protecting your property and making sure. I don't want to get phone calls from clients that say, oh, I've had 3 water claims in the last 3 years and now my insurance company is canceling me. Of course they are. There are things that you can do to mitigate your risk and assist your property in protecting itself, by making sure that you're doing the things that we talked about earlier. Walking around your property, make sure there are no cracks in the foundation so that water can get in. And also too, next week, we're going to talk about landscaping. We're going to talk about flower beds, my favorite topic, because I love flowers. Even though I'm allergic to all of them all the time, there is not a flower that I am not allergic to. But I love to look at them. I think they're beautiful. They add aesthetic value to your property and its presentation to the community. But it must be done in a way that does not damage the property and allow water to pool up against it, alongside it, and coming through and constantly deteriorating your foundation and providing cracks into your foundation. So that's what we're going to talk about next week. Thank you so much, Jeff, for being here to talk about flood insurance. Again, if you want a flood quote, if you want to talk about your situation in detail, we are happy to receive you at 443-660-7131. You can also instant message us on Facebook at Ramona Jones McClain, Farmers Agent, or you can send us a text to 443-660-7131. I am Ramona Jones McClain, your insurance guru, and we are out. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Ramona. Take care.
All righty.